Hey everybody, this is Rydo and we're back to Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel. Today is Wednesday, November 16th. My sleep schedule still is a little wonky, so starting later in the evening than I probably should. Like late evening streams never have really shown any success on YouTube. You really want to get somewhere around 10 a.m. to noon. I would say maybe depending on your time zone. A lot of the algorithm on YouTube, I think, heavily relies more around 8 a.m. in California than you would actually believe. Let's see. They're gonna have a upcoming Forbidden List update. What are they changing? Just like one new card being forbidden, one new card being added to semi-limited, and then one card being lifted from being semi-limited. That's not big changes by any means. There's an issue. Here's a problem here. Players are receiving 20 legacy pack tickets instead of 10 by answering it. Posted. Please note that the 20 packs have received due to this issue can be used without any problems. Like, okay, so they're just mentioning, oops, we messed up, and some people got 20. Although I did the survey and I think I got 10, so that is hardly treating the audience fairly or nicely, because the right response to that when you make a mistake in these kinds of games is to just say, well, we're gonna just have to eat that difference, and everybody who got 10 will now get another 10 as compensation, so that everybody fairly is awarded 20. It's not like 10 extra packs here of these legacy packs is really anything at all. It's giving you cards that are not really playable in the meta, and is giving you 20 cards for 10 packs. There is really some craziness around just how incredibly crazy and cheap trading card companies can be at times. Like Magic is also somewhat that way, where they're just trying to milk the players for tons of money. That being said, I did hear that Wizards of the Coast, owner of Magic the Gathering and Dungeons and Dragons, attempted and failed to split off from Hasbro, because apparently Dungeons and Dragons is making 70% of the profit of all of Hasbro. So the other 30% of profit from Hasbro is every other Hasbro board game, which I kind of find that hard to believe, but not that hard to believe. It kind of makes some sense. Selling cardboard at an overpriced amount probably doesn't make as much money as you would think, because it is still this physical, somewhat heavy object. I imagine selling a cell phone, even a cheap cell phone that's only worth like $300, takes up considerably less space and shipping and less shelf space to sell and weight compared to a board game, which is much bigger and probably the equivalent weight of a cell phone. So yeah, would you? So I mean, that's not really comparing apples to apples, but there's a certain point there. By the same kind of general comparison, I imagine books are also not selling much because they are bigger and heavier than cell phones, and not as expensive, and they're kind of bigger and heavier than board games. And I would say recurring revenue is what everybody's looking for in a business, and in Hasbro's case, it's really the thing that I think would save Hasbro, because if there was a quarterly or biannual / semi-annual system where twice a year a new board game was automatically shipped, and you were automatically charging people for that board game, that would work a little bit nicer. Just to ship it by mail, ship it really slow by mail, just bulk weight, get it off store shelves. They've been heavily relying on impulse buys for board games, and impulse buys just don't work that well these days when you're competing against video games. Get them young, get them on their first birthday, that you would sign up a kid for a Hasbro box, and on their first birthday they would receive a new board game as a birthday present from Hasbro, although the parents are actually paying for it. And then every birthday after that they would get another one, and then every Christmas they would get one, and that would guarantee you some sales in some kind of Hasbro box. Then you'd probably try to build up a bigger system above that, where you on a monthly scale are sending some kind of box, but that some kind of box didn't have a full board game in it, or if it did have a board game in it, it was something that was just printed on kind of a thick paper and then rolled into a tube, instead of having a thick cardboard back. And inherently that should be the way it should be anyways, is that there should be really just a nice chessboard like base that has screws or hooks on the side, and you lift a piece of plastic and you unroll a piece of paper onto that base, and then that is your board game for one game. And then you take that out and put in a different piece of paper, and you've got a different board game. That would save so much. And as far as pips and pieces and things like that, those can be fairly standardized. And implementing any kind of system like that would solve a lot of Hasbro's problems, in which they're just selling board game after board game, where really there needs to be a universal base and universal pieces for most board games. But that's not the only problem with Hasbro. Dungeons and Dragons has kind of a major problem in that it's never been able to bring in as many people as it really should, for as culturally relevant as Dungeons and Dragons is. And it's kind of hard to convince parents to let kids play Dungeons and Dragons at all, so you run into an issue there. I guess you can activate this with no real problem, so we should. The fact that Dungeons and Dragons has not really tried to have an optimized experience that takes less time, like some kind of really short campaigns, and then it hasn't tried to digitize anything, because inherently Dungeons and Dragons is built around the idea of having just a ton of time and a ton of space and just a lot of commitment, but also there's the Dungeon Masters books, guidebooks that they sell. So it really is a book company more than anything else, instead of a board game company. And they've never really digitized the board game rules in any fashion that he would consider modern. I'm sure there are ebooks out there for the guidebooks, but like there is no interactive experience. This is on an iPad. There is no video game experience. This is Dungeons and Dragons, but done digitally. Tabletop Simulator probably does Dungeons and Dragons fairly well. Yeah, and I guess that's pretty much all I have to say about that, and I don't even know why I got onto that. For the accountability section, I am enjoying playing Resident Evil 4. There was a point where it started to feel a little wonky, and I exited it out and exited back in. It's not micro-stuttering per se, it's just stuttering, I'd say, every now and then. And some of that may be the HD remake, some of that may just be the game. Some of it might all actually just be the controls of the game. The game's controls just are old-fashioned, and in playing it, in knowing that there's going to be a remake, there is obviously things that need improvement. Like, there's no weapon wheel in the game at all. The D-pad buttons don't do anything other than move the character. Same as the left stick. Clicking the left click and the right click doesn't do anything. I've gotten as far as past the cabin, where you get locked in a cabin and have to defend it for several minutes, and it takes a couple of minutes too long to defend. Let's pretend during the end phase. But mostly, I am just enjoying it. Like, there really isn't that much to say. During the end phase... But yeah, I really am not having a lot of critical things to say. The game looks great with the fan-made HD textures. The game plays still acceptably. I wouldn't say great, but it plays acceptably. I've gotten to the point where I have Ashley as a character. I'm playing on normal, so I'm dying a little bit more than you normally would want to, in the sense that I'm dying at all. But I have kind of plenty of bullets, and I know all the tricks, and I know where most of the treasures are, so I have a ridiculous amount of gold. So I am fully set up to potentially have the exact experience that you would want in this kind of in playing Resident Evil 4. I'm heavily relying on the knife, and then if I was to play New Game Plus, there is a decent argument that I might find it within me worthy to do the New Game Plus, but I also may find that if you just want some of the extra content, like the golden typewriter, machine gun, and all of that, I think there's some fairly tight requirements to get those extra things, and it very possibly is just not really worth going through the game 3 times to unlock a special item to then go through the game a 4th time at this point. Yeah, the new remake of Resident Evil 4 will almost certainly not really be as emphatic on playing the game 2-3 times. Whereas the old Resident Evil games were definitely like that. All the corniness in the dialogue, and what I can only assume were just like literal translations from Japanese to English, are still there. And they are rough, and it's not just like they're rough and that they're lewd jokes. Some of them are lewd jokes that would make a lot of sense if they were kind of literal translations from Japanese, which I can't really complain about literal translations, because if you get anywhere away from literal translations from Japanese to English, then you're doing some form of censorship or localization, whatever you want to call it, if you're intentionally changing the meaning. But I think some of it is also just very intentional, and could have been the English side doing the intentional Jill sandwich references, which I didn't really know they made a Jill sandwich reference. It's a Sly reference right before you get into the cabin. Leon says we're sandwiched, and so easy enough to not recognize that that's a reference. But yeah, in the hours that I've been awake and actually making content, that's what I've been doing, is playing Resident Evil 4. I doubt I'll have too much to say otherwise about the game. That there may be one or two things I found or realized in this playthrough that I've never seen before, which is somewhat amazing that for a game that used to be my favorite game, there still is something new to find on the 4th or 5th playthrough. I also decided to marathon an anime series, which, between playing Resident Evil 4 and watching anime on Netflix, it's like 20 years that have gone back in time. Because, yeah, I watched this anime on Netflix called Romantic Killer, where this anime girl who plays a bunch of video games and eats chocolates and is obsessed with her pet cat and does nothing else, gets visited by a wizard who is desperate to make her start thinking about dating and have a romance. The implication here is that she mostly plays a lot of romance video games, at least enough that she knows the inner workings of the otome visual novel type games and all the cliches. And instead of just like cooperating with this wizard character and saying, okay, fine, I'll give in, I'll start dating, and then I'll get back my chocolate and my video games and my cat. The cat doesn't go away. The wizard sends her parents, and they take the cat to America. So she's living alone in Japan. And then he manipulates things so that she starts bumping into good-looking Japanese teenage boys. And then part, really, I don't think the wizard actually changed that much as far as reality. That these are characters that probably existed before the wizard showed up, and she was just oblivious to it. And I kind of was thinking that that was going to be the big twist and theme, is that the wizard was going to say, actually, I didn't use any magic at all. These people were always here. You've just been obsessed with video games and running home from school and just not participating in Japanese society. And yeah, it's a funny premise that she just swears to not fall in love, even though he's going to constantly try and manipulate things, so she does fall in love following visual novel cliches. And inevitably, she does form at least friendships and form the idea of potentially being willing to actually have a romantic relationship with these boys. But she is still, even at the end of the first season, kind of being forced into it. Like, it's probably not the best moral. It is very much a Japanese moral thing. Hey, you teenage Japanese people, quit eating your chocolate and playing video games and being obsessed with cats, and go out there and date and make babies, so we have more good, pure-hearted, pure-blooded Japanese people and fight the declining birth rate, which is what exactly it says. But they're lightheartedly covering it. The entire series is incredibly lighthearted until the last couple episodes, and then it becomes like a lot of animes. It throws in an interesting twist, or a weird twist, to make it more dramatic, and yeah, it slightly hints that there's more going on in the other characters in the boys' heads and minds too, and that they aren't just these airheaded NPCs from video games just coming out of nowhere. But yeah, if the main character really was asexual, which I'm not sure she ever really was, trying to force her to date is wrong. Trying to force anybody to date is wrong in general. And it definitely comes off as something a very bad parent would do, although in the West, in the United States, it would be the exact opposite. Parents would be pressuring their kids not to date or have any romantic interest. But if somebody really does just say, hey, I like chocolate, I like video games, and I like a cat, and I don't want to like spend my energy, which it takes a lot of energy to date, and usually a lot of money too. If that's somebody's desire, it's really wrong to try and force somebody into societal norms, whatever your society is, just because you're uncomfortable that somebody is different, which is really what this boils down to. Like, Japan's declining birth rate is not going to be fixed if you just get a bunch of awkward, antisocial shut-ins to all even date each other, because that's just not what they want to do with their time. And eventually, if you're lucky, you will find somebody who shares your interest, if that's what you really want and that's what you seek out, instead of constantly compromising yourself, which that's the real tragedy in Romantic Killer that's just being conveniently ignored, is that the main character is constantly having to compromise and change her actions, desires, and attitude to accommodate other people that she would have never accommodated otherwise, whether it's the wizard, whether it's the other potential romance partners, the boys. Like, naturally you might call that growth, but forced under coercion, that's just manipulation. The character as described in the first episode is a girl who loves video games, loves chocolate, and loves her cats. By the end of the game, by the end of the first season, she's not playing video games much at all. So the thing she truly loved is gone there. She's not eating chocolate much at all, if at all. And she's not even really expressing herself and her love for her cat anywhere as much as she wanted to. Like, her love for her cat extends basically to her whole family. The whole family loves the cat like crazy, but there's nothing inherently wrong with that. And so they all have like cat clothes that they wear. Like, every single outfit she has some kind of cat theme image on it. Her cell phone case has a cat themed cell phone case. She's talking about her cat all the time. And about halfway through the series, she gets pushed to stop wearing the cat clothes and dress like a average, like, teenage girl that would be dating, and dress up nice. So, like, the character is not the same character at the end of the show than at the beginning of the show. And yeah, that's a kind of a great example, and this has very little to do with video games. I'm just talking about it because that's what I watched. It's kind of a great example of where you can explore in fantasy something and be okay with it being slightly morally wrong. But if that happened in reality, it wouldn't be acceptable at all. Because very similar scenario there could definitely happen. You could have parents that are like, we're going to take away your video games, we're going to take away your cat, we're going to take away all chocolate until you get a boyfriend. And that forcing people, particularly to make emotional journeys like dating and romance before they're ready, is really wrong. It's frankly a little rapey, for lack of a better term. Let's see, did I do anything else besides play Resident Evil 4 and watch Romantic Killer on Netflix? I probably watched some other stuff, or started to watch some other stuff on Netflix, like Skull and Bone or Shadow and Bone. I started watching a couple episodes of that. I'm still getting into it, so I really don't have anything to say on that. I'm still watching a lot of TV in general. I've been watching the Bleach 1,000 Years War. The 1,000 Years War, I believe, is the section of Bleach that was particularly badly animated. There's also definitely some weirdness in, like, the horror elements that get animated sometimes, like skeletons and just like ghoulish faces that you just never saw that in any of the previous Bleach cartoon. That is being released like subtitles on Hulu on a weekly basis, so it's also moving incredibly too slow, and that's always been the problem with Bleach. I'm tempted somewhat to think about pulling the trigger and even having a marathon through Naruto. I was kind of a little too old when Naruto came out, and maybe just a little too busy when it was coming out to watch that. So a marathon around Naruto just to get through it as fast as possible and say I watched it doesn't sound like the worst idea ever. But that would be a big commitment, and at a certain point there's also an argument to why not just do that with one piece. But yeah, the fact that I'm watching any anime and thinking about potentially even watching more anime is somewhat new. Like, I've never fully rejected an anime and said I hate it, but there has definitely been a long decade plus in which I've watched very little of it. And that mostly just, I think, came down to me opting to I think that mostly came down to me mostly oh, what am I trying to say? Mostly just playing video games. Yeah. I've been hyper focused on playing video games and trying to make this YouTube channel successful as I can make it, which is maybe not that successful in the first place. I did actually spend some extra time, come to think of it. Yeah, there's almost completely slipped my mind. I changed my YouTube short system a little bit. I've been doing a square, like 500 by 500 pixel image, where it seems on YouTube the shorts are definitely going for a 9 by 16, not to be confused with 16 by 9 resolution. Which effectively means I should be doing a portrait version of 1080p by 1920 on the resolution, if I can do that. So, with me not being very happy with the way the thumbnails go and the way it looks, I am getting a lot of views. It seems like there is an actual snowball effect on those YouTube shorts. It will be somewhat disappointing, but I'll take the success if I become known as just a channel that does YouTube shorts, and at some point that may even really make me feel like I should just abandon making other content and only do YouTube shorts, or make a new channel specifically for YouTube shorts. But I also heavily suspect YouTube shorts will be a fad that lasts maybe a couple years and then it'll be gone, or it'll become mundane and not the thing the algorithm is being artificially programmed to promote. So what I did is I rotated the entire web page, which you can do in OBS, 90 degrees. So it's just like the entire image is on its side. That's because OBS, it would be a hassle to have OBS switch the resolution in its internal settings from 1920 by 1080, where it's very easy just to say, well, let's just record this on its side and then use a batch file, FFmpeg, really, to rotate it 90 degrees after the fact. And so that's exactly what I did, is instead of, before I was cropping the image somewhat using FFmpeg, and now I'm just rotating the image with FFmpeg. Now, to get the page to look right, I am still setting up a web browser that is not really at that resolution, so there's potentially still going to be not the sharpest pixel image as it could be. I may try and tweak that a little bit more, but I may also give up, not bother, because it kind of looks fine being scaled up from each resolution to it. And then I was able to change the CSS code, the custom style sheet code, to move things around a little bit on the Steam page. And in fact, there's one more thing I still need to hide. But I wanted the video to be in the middle of the screen, because there's just a lot of garbage when you're looking at a YouTube short. There's a little logo in the lower left hand corner, there's a bunch of icons on the right hand corner, so the video being more in the middle makes it more visible, so I was able to just move around things. And move the video into the middle and move the description text down lower, which furthers the custom way that this looks, and is just not something that somebody is going to easily be able to copy without at least going through the same steps that I went through. Still not going to win this turn. I guess I'm not going to run into a lot of people willing to just surrender. So, yeah. Now there will be a much bigger thumbnail, a more centered thumbnail. The game's thumbnail will be bigger, but the thumbnail for the short itself on YouTube will be better, not bigger. So it'll take a while, probably several months, until these videos start showing up, but it does look a lot better, I think. The only other improvement that I can, off the top of my head, hope for, and would like to do, but I don't know what to do, is I'd like to change the audio on it. And I don't know if I really have any way to change the audio. Like, I could randomize different songs, and that would be a slight improvement, but it would be a lot of work, and I don't really know how to do that. But ideally, I would like to do the gimmick where it loops into each other, because these videos do play back in cycles so much, and it does seem to be the trend. I don't know if I particularly like it or agree with it, that short videos should end on a sentence that then wraps around to the beginning of the first sentence in it. But I don't want to put any real work into it or try and script things for every single one of these videos. So at best, I probably could find music that loops around after a minute fairly nicely. But I don't even know if that's really that necessary, because in the other way, on the other hand, the shorts that loop around with the text or with the dialogue are kind of just doing a gimmick, and kind of just clickbaity type gimmick. Although the clickbait isn't to get you to click, it's a more of a stay bait to get you to stay and watch the exact same thing twice. Which, yeah, most shorts, before I even have time to react, do tend to play at least 1.5 times. Which is just an example of artificial numbers and artificial views being increasingly prevalent in YouTube. I think there's very little I could ever do to get somebody to watch 1.5 times the length of any of my episodes that are hours long. Even if the videos did loop, which they don't, they jump to the next video. which is the right thing to do. Inherently, YouTube Shorts should also be jumping to the next YouTube Short, and it just doesn't. It doesn't when I click on a short individually. Maybe there's some other way in which it would jump to the next thing. So it's really not doing what I think TikTok does. Anyways, let's start going through the news, because yeah, we're probably going to have quite a bit of news since we didn't go through any games on Monday, and there's no reason to try to go long here. I need to get back to Resident Evil 4, and yeah, I don't know if I have anything else to do. I guess I also did some cleaning and physical labor over the past couple of days. I moved some speakers around that I've not used in a very long time, and I'm ready to get rid of, even though they are practically new and expensive. I put the case back on the side of my computer case, back on, even though the fan on it is broken. The wire got ripped out on the CPU case fan, and yeah, I think that's about all I did. But even doing that required lying down on the floor and then getting up and just bending over and lifting, and all of that with a bad back is more than enough to devastate me for a few hours. I've also been having this problem, which honestly, I don't know why I'm not wearing the gloves right now. I've been having this problem where I've been waking up with like real painful arthritis in my right hand, and I bought these copper compression gloves with little touchscreen weave in it, and honestly the touchscreen weave works for my thumb but doesn't work for my forefinger. And basically I probably bought some that were too big. I probably should have bought large instead of extra large, because the idea is it is supposed to be squeezing your hand and just squeezing any inflammation, any fluids out of your... Yeah, that feels very awkward to be wearing the glove and trying to use the mouse at the same time. Yep. Inherently, I think that is the problem with them, is that maybe if they were fingerless gloves, it would work a little bit better. But generally speaking, I think it is just always going to be a little awkward to try to do anything with the gloves. I wish there was a way I could cancel this. But no such luck. So we'll have to play around with this one. But yeah, I do think they're working, even just using them for a couple hours a day. I do think that there is some significant perceived reduction in pain. Right. Let's see. But it is definitely in a weird position where I can really only wear the gloves when I'm not doing anything. Or I could pull Michael Jackson and wear one glove on and one glove off while I'm playing with the mouse. But it's my right hand, the one that I use predominantly, that hurts, so wearing a glove on my left hand probably doesn't do too much. moving slow. D/D/D. Ah. Should probably look at what this card does. Let's see. Oh, what does D/D/D stand for? Probably Dark Dimension something. D. Well, I probably lost here. So let's just let them win. We probably had already talked about this. PlayStation has been working on NFT and blockchain technologies. Patents reveal. I suspect that this is true. This is a Video Games Chronicle article. But it also may be just that Sony is fighting in the patent wars to have patents on things, and possibly even patenting ideas so other people can't do it. Particularly when you're talking Sony, which is more of a ecosystem / console provider than a game developer. It would make a lot of sense for them to potentially improve gaming in general by having a patent around blockchains and NFTs and stopping other people from trying to make blockchain NFT games and putting it on the PlayStation. Although in all fairness, Sony could also just say we won't allow blockchain NFTs on PlayStation ever, but by having a patent that stops them also from making blockchain NFT games on competitive systems like the Xbox or the Switch or even mobile. So there might be some benevolence in there, but honestly there's really no reason to assume any benevolence. Sony's previous actions don't benefit it that doubt. Let's see. We already talked about Xbox. No, we talked about this last time. Proactively suspending 4.8 user accounts in the first half of 2022. Which that really just doesn't mean much of anything. Apparently Rockstar reportedly turned down Eminem for a GTA movie. The Top Gun director Tony Scott was also reportedly attached. At his height of popularity, Eminem wouldn't have been a terrible character to be in a GTA movie. GTA 3 maybe. I guess also though there would have been just that danger of the hot coffee mod still being too prevalent, or Eminem would have wanted too much money. It probably would have hurt Eminem's image more than it would have hurt GTA's, frankly, because Eminem's image is to present himself as being real and legitimate and as kind of like a gangster rapper, which is I guess what you would call him. Whereas if he started to parody that in a GTA movie, then it would be much like Snoop Dogg, where at one time Snoop Dogg was probably a gangster rapper, but now he is much more known for doing cameos of himself and being on Martha Stewart. What is a 2-hour experience going to be in a GTA movie is really a great question to ask, because GTA games tend to be a lot longer than that, and the good content is actually few and far between. Most of it is just goofing off and doing ridiculous things. It probably wouldn't have made terrible bad sense to make a GTA movie on the cheap after like Fast and Furious 2 or 3 came out and said, hey, this is our franchise, 2, we need to compete against Fast and Furious on some level. We need to try something like that. Like, inherently, GTA needs to kind of feel like the godfather of a new generation, but it doesn't have the long books, Godfather books, to lean on. Yeah, and it's really been a long time since they've made criminal movies where the criminals aren't actually characters you actually are supposed to like, and that aren't just doing things because they're bad. They're doing things because they're forced into it. And you see that in the Fast and Furious series too, where all of a sudden it becomes about family and everybody working together and everybody actually being good guys. So you would kind of have to get over that hump too. Can you make a GTA movie where the guys are total scum and people still want to watch it? People really don't even want to watch the Godfather series because it's too long and a little too dark. Yeah. Honestly, it probably wouldn't be a terrible thought to put on the table, at least, that a GTA movie should be an edgelord teenager kid gets sucked into the video game instead of a little translation of a GTA movie. But yeah, Rockstar turned it down probably at the height of making more money than they could count. And in the long run, that probably was the smart move. As Rockstar potentially gets more desperate, though, I will heavily suspect that they might make a GTA movie. An animated movie, or even an anime around GTA, kind of makes more sense. Because you just have a lot of limiting factors around what would be considered an appropriate GTA game or GTA movie that would be hard to do in live action or with a big budget. Speaking of desperation, I don't know if I have an article here or not, but Embracer Group has announced, Embracer Group, as the owners of Gearbox, has announced a Gearbox Shanghai. So now there is a Gearbox, the original Gearbox in Frisco, Texas, North Dallas, Texas. There is the spin-off in Montreal, but there might also be a Gearbox office in Quebec. I can't even remember. And now there's a Gearbox in Shanghai. So either 2/3 of the Gearboxes that you would recognize are 2/3 of the Gearboxes that exist now are not the Gearbox that you would recognize as far as making Borderlands, or 3/4 of the Gearboxes that exist are not the Gearbox you'd recognize. And that's not to even touch upon the high possibility that a lot of the people who made Borderlands 1 are just not the same people or just not working at Gearbox in North Dallas anymore. I mean, you can only go so far at this point as far as applauding Randy Pitchford for not saying anything stupid, or at least not saying it loud enough that anybody hears it. Like, I can certainly say yes, it's nice he's gotten that far, but that's pale in comparison when to selling the entire company to Embracer Group, and then Embracer Group using the name just to start new companies. And Embracer Group's starting a office in Shanghai, China, mainland China there, is definitely a step in a wrong direction in my opinion, because that screams that they're going to try and do business in China, and that's going to bite them in the butt almost certainly. At a certain point though, you kind of just have to, you do have to kind of also just wait and see. Like Shanghai Gearbox China may do very little and may change its name before they even release their first game. That is a possibility, but it is kind of a smack in the front to these companies that Embracer Group said they were embracing and were going to treat right, to say now companies that we own, we're going to take your name and we're going to use it however we feel, and we're going to drag your name through the mud potentially. More than Gearbox's name has already been dragged through the mud. Moving on, the God of War Ragnarok Easter egg says Parappa the Rapper is history's greatest musician. A piece of dialogue refers to Kratos appearing in PlayStation's All-Stars Battle Royale, which I guess that's probably an old game, not a new All-Stars Battle Royale. Yeah, I think that's an old Smash Brothers clone type game. I haven't heard anybody say anything new about God of War Ragnarok. Otherwise, I'm assuming that it is just a very good game. I'm more isolated than ever as I'm listening to fewer and fewer mainstream video game journalists talk about games, which means I'm just listening to basically nobody talk about video games. And so I still need to find some better sources. But yeah, I assume God of War Ragnarok is just very popular, and when we get into the Game Awards, I assume it will get a lot of praise there. I saw a Kotaku article via Facebook saying RetroMags.com has now all 298 issues of Nintendo Power, which I think this really is an old article that was just retweeted, because I'm fairly certain that there were more than 298 issues of Nintendo Power. I'm fairly certain it went far, or at least a little bit over 300, because I recall seeing a 300th issue, unless I'm thinking of a 200th issue. I had somewhere between issue 100 and I think over issue 300 of Nintendo Power. So the numbers seem wrong. And I know RetroMags did have all the Nintendo Powers at one point scanned in. But then Nintendo changed, tried to take them down or copyright claim it. And I think they took it down at that point. Maybe it's back up. And I'm sure there's torrents out there to get it. It does seem like RetroMags is still making occasional bits of progress each month with scanning other old or defunct video game magazines. I don't know if it's actively trying to do anything other than video game magazines, in that they've changed their policy before. Like, there was a policy of 10 years and then sometimes 15 years that they were going to hold off on publishing things, so nothing newer than 10 years ago was allowed to be posted by its submitters, which 10 years is quite a long time, even at that. But yeah, they've changed that policy now, and it seems like it's 10 years across the board. The inherent problem, I'd say, before you go and try and get a bunch of CBR comic book rare files of retro magazines, is that they're not going to really fit on an ebook reader, and they're not going to really fit on hard drives in general. You're somewhere between 40 and 400 gigabytes of data once you start getting into the visual data aspects. It's not like MP3s that are pathetically small by today's standards. You still would need a decent amount of extra space, and that decent amount of extra space won't account for putting it on perhaps a tablet or cell phone if you don't have SD slots, which they're trying to get rid of micro SD slots in phones. So then, yeah, paying extra to have internal storage to have 512 gigabytes of space, and then having to fill all of it up with a bunch of retro magazines doesn't really work. It's just never been a system as easy as here's a 1 megabyte MP3 that you can copy onto anything. Plus, arguably, I don't know how many people really would want to read all the magazines. Nostalgic people certainly, but I don't think a new generation of kids. These retro magazines should be available in either digital or physical versions in libraries. But they aren't. And honestly, Nintendo Power should just be available on Nintendo's websites to go back and look at it, because that's where Nintendo personally could get its best value, is to say, here's some high-res scans of these old Nintendo Power things we created. We're not selling them anyways. This will bring more interest in our old games. The problem there, of course, is Nintendo has failed to properly emulate as many games as it can. So if you're reading Nintendo Power issue 100 and it's talking about Pilot Wing 64, well, you might be able to emulate Pilot Wing 64 and play that, but you probably can't then play the other 20 games that would have been in that magazine. So, yeah. The only way to play most of those old games that Nintendo Power would have been talking about would have been through better emulation than what Nintendo offers. Moving on with the news. On its release date, Somerville developer Jumpship has already been acquired. The publisher Thunderful is expected to complete the deal today for undisclosed fee. Which, yeah, you don't see this very often, that a company would be acquired the day a game is released. But what that basically says is that they've negotiated very well to say we're ready to be acquired, but we have this contractual obligation with a different publisher to publish this game and release this game, but we're no longer under contract as soon as the game releases on that release date, so let's just set the date for that same point. This helps the developer quite a bit, because if their game Jumpship, if their game Somerville comes out and is absolute garbage, the company that's acquiring them doesn't have time to recognize that and back out of the acquisition, which is probably why you usually don't see this kind of situation, because the company that would have more power and more leverage would be the company buying the smaller company, and they almost certainly would have wanted to say, we'll think about this after we see how your game releases. Yeah, I can't think of another instance I've ever heard of a company being acquired on the day of a game release. It's bad optics, frankly, because it definitely gives a feeling that maybe they won't support this new game that just was released that much, or that they won't be hungry to make a sequel to the new game. There's several little problems with it. Let's see. Seems to me like I'm gonna have to get better at playing Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel if I want to get to the platinum level. What is stopping all of this from happening is the real question. There's something on this field that's stopping me from special summoning monsters. And so you may have just interacted there to set himself up to win on the next turn. Okay. So I've lost there. God of War Ragnarok's boxed launch sales beat Elden Ring's Modern Warfare's sales in the UK. I'll just leave it at that. FIFA 23 Trevelia's shot will be finally nerfed in the next update if you're interested around that. Phil Spencer apparently, quote, thought there was no effing way Flight Sim was running in real time. Microsoft's Flight Simulator's boss describes his pitch meeting, and we knew we had something. Now, I assume this is the new Flight Simulator he's talking about and not the original Flight Simulator, which he could certainly be talking about the 40 years ago Flight Simulator game. It's interesting how there probably was very little interest in making a new Flight Simulator, and just the fact that we were close to a 40th year anniversary pushed them to greenlight that project, and it somehow worked out well, when usually the situation is that never works out well, to just arbitrarily greenlight making a new game. Still dealing with the pass. And we'll be dealing with the past for at least a couple of weeks, I would say, until we get to level 100, and then we'll be back to being able to just ignore it for most of the time. Alright, let's try and burn through the news. We've been going for an hour. Yeah, it really is getting down to the point where you're just going to kind of consistently get an hour of Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel. There is a new Pokemon trading card game live that's an open beta, and I'm going to check that out. I have a real hard time imagining that I would want to jump over and play Pokemon. I could kind of see it, certainly, but Pokemon's a little too Pokemon-y, for lack of a better term. It's a little too kid-friendly, in my opinion. Not that there's much in Yu-Gi-Oh! That's not kid-friendly, but I could see jumping, potentially thinking about jumping over there. It's definitely on the table. But honestly, I don't think anything changes anything. I'm just getting slower and worse at jumping between playing a card game and talking about video game news, and so just having discrete segments is really the way to go. Now, if I didn't talk about the news at all, or the accountability section, what was going on in my life at all, I wouldn't play Yu-Gi-Oh! At all for maybe more than 10-20 minutes. So that's not going anywhere. But at a certain point after an hour, I just need to start burning through the news. Let's see, Multiversus Season 2 begins today with a major update, which I kind of felt like Multiversus was in beta still. To be at Season 2 is a little surprising, but not that crazy. It adds a shop, big head mode, and more content-heavy battle passes. They're definitely trying to monetize Multiversus, I think, faster than they really should, considering I don't think there's enough characters in it. Phil Spencer says he's open to committing to Sony that Call of Duty will stay on PlayStation longer term. I think he said that before. Suggesting he may be willing to make concessions is to basically say nothing. Like, this is definitely not committal language to say that he suggests he may be willing to make concessions. Yeah. But yeah. He definitely has to at least pretend like he's open to that idea. And honestly, I just don't think Xbox is that evil, that mustache twirling, that they would try and have Call of Duty games exclusive to the Xbox. If anything, they probably would just make a different game by a different name that was very similar to Call of Duty that was an exclusive. The only argument I could kind of see that they would try to have more Call of Duty type exclusives is there was this point with the nominations that Microsoft hasn't had a single exclusive game nominated for the Game Awards in 10 years. Which is to say, yeah, Microsoft hasn't really cared about making exclusive games, or they really haven't cared about even making that good of games in 10 years. Instead, they've been focusing much more on just Game Pass games and then licensing other game developers. I really don't look at Microsoft as a company that makes video games or makes good video games, even though they've acquired a lot of companies that make video games. I look at Microsoft as the company that runs Windows and Microsoft Azure servers, operating systems, and services, and that makes them good to make the Xbox hardware and software operating system, because that's their specialty. But when it comes to making something fun, I don't look towards Microsoft. And there's a real question about, like, do they care about the Game Awards? Are they submitting games to the Game Awards? Is there just an inherent bias in the nominators of the Game Awards, since that is a small group of select people. How many of the Game Award games that could have been nominated as Xbox versions were instead nominated as PlayStation versions? That's also something you'd have to investigate. Let's see, moving on. Dragon's Dogma and Devil May Cry director says devs, I guess, in general felt really let down by PS3 hardware. Claims the system architecture made it harder to pull off visual effects. Almost certainly true. Like, there were some real problems with the PlayStation 3, and there might even be a slight parallel to the complaints being made by developers around the PlayStation 3 versus complaints of developers having to make Series S versions of their game and support the Series S instead of only supporting the Series X. Although arguably the scenario is actually very different between the Series S and the PlayStation 3, in that the PlayStation 3 was the most expensive hardware when it was out in its generation, and it was kind of potentially the most powerful if you could program for it, but nobody could program for it. So the PlayStation 3 is much closer to a Series X than it is a Series S, where the Series S is keeping prices down in the middle of or arguably at the beginning of a recession, and that's probably a good thing. I actually did see a slick deals for getting a Series S and then some, like a Dell gift card or something that brought it down to about $250, which is maybe not exactly where you'd like it to be. You'd like it to all go back down to being less than $200, but that's not really likely to happen. So yeah, this Black Friday, I wouldn't be surprised if we see the Series S on sale somewhat, whereas the Series X and the PlayStation 5 probably won't be on sale. PlayStation 4s might be on sale, but might not. As far as actual games on sale, I don't suspect that there's that much. It does highlight something from just a Japanese culture perspective, and it does seem like there's just a more willingness to be honest and go public with some of these comments now, whereas in the past I wouldn't be surprised if this guy would have never said anything bad to allow PlayStation to save face, but now they're willing to come out and say it publicly, what was known internally for a long time. That highlights an instance where they don't care about helping Sony save face, and that, in my opinion, and maybe this is just my myopic viewpoint, this is probably because Sony of Japan is no longer in charge of PlayStation. If Sony of Japan was in charge of PlayStation still, then Hideki Itsuno probably would be taking meetings on a fairly regular basis with Sony of Japan and making proposals for new games, and have this friendly relationship with Sony of Japan enough that he wouldn't come out and say even a slightly negative thing. Which, yeah, to say even a slightly negative thing in Japanese is to stab somebody in the heart, because the Japanese are 100% positive all the time, or at least always put on a face of it being 100% positive all the time, usually when they're talking about companies. Let's see, moving on. November's remaining Xbox Game Pass titles have been revealed. I think we'd already covered this. Dune, Spice Wars, Gungrave Gore, Warhammer 40k, Dark Tide. Phil Spencer says the Xbox business will become unattainable if it remains irrelevant on mobile. He claims that Activision Blizzard's deal is primarily about Candy Crush, not Call of Duty, which is an interesting argument to make. It's almost slightly believable. Remember, Microsoft does, I think it was Microsoft that did announce they're going to try and make their own platform for games for iOS and Android instead of the Google Play Store or the App Store, Apple App Store. Candy Crush is not a relevant mobile game at this point. It's relevant historically, but I don't think anybody new is hopping into Candy Crush and playing Candy Crush. People who are still playing Candy Crush now are just hopelessly addicted to it and probably have put more money than it deserves into it for a game that cheats and actively will not let you win unless you pay to win. And even if you do pay to win, it actively will still cheat and not let you win, so you pay more. You do certainly have a weird statement on the backdrop of how Diablo mobile games were horribly received from Activision Blizzard. So, like, Microsoft trying to get into mobile, they're going to have to think of a better idea, and I just haven't seen anybody actually think of a good idea as far as making mobile games. We just don't even have an archetype or an example really of what a great mobile game is. The closest we have is something like Genshin Impact, and Genshin Impact is still lots of microtransactions and not really much of an actual game after that. I don't know how you fix that. Like, it's like trying to invent a whole new language as far as mobile games are. Like, we just don't know what a good mobile game should look like. And I can't even, in this case, like, highlight Destiny Child and say that it should be the archetype of good mobile games. It might be the archetype of good mobile games, but it probably isn't. Let's see. Sony will reportedly offer 25% off PlayStation Plus subscriptions for Black Friday. The deal will cover all membership tiers according to a reliable leaker. So yeah, I guess take that information to heart and don't subscribe to PlayStation Plus until Black Friday. November's PlayStation Plus game catalog and classic titles are now available. That's including Skyrim, Rainbow Six Siege, Kingdom Hearts, and Ratchet and Clank games. We already kind of covered those. Xbox's boss wants to hit $99 to $129 price point for its streaming device. Project Keystone is still in the works, but it could be years from release. I saw another article basically saying that they've shelved the project because of the price point, and that might be a different way to describe it, but it's probably not accurate if they are actually actively working on it, which still in the works and being shelved are contradictory terms. Shelved just means you put it on a shelf and you stop working on it and you come back to it later. Still in the works means you're working on it. The fact that the minimum price here is $99 is somewhat shockingly high, because people are going to compare this to an Amazon streaming stick. They are going to compare this to a Roku stick. It's going to be compared to the lowest level Google Chromecast stick that you can find. Those are products that I would buy around $30 to $40, not $100. If you throw in a year of the streaming service with $100, the price sounds maybe a little bit better, but that's still a tough sale. And arguably you should give 30 days free streaming on the service and then sell the device cheaper because of that, but that would lead to a lot of people potentially not keeping the streaming service. But yeah, if you could get to stick for $30, which would be a huge loss on Microsoft's part, then charge $70 for your streaming service after the fact, after 30 days. But yeah, this is why so far we haven't had a streaming device success, is that it's just too expensive, and that you really can't get past that point that TVs are never going to be strong enough in their CPUs and GPUs to have built-in game streaming. Your average cheap Walmart TV won't have that, so you're going to then need a device that's the equivalent of a Switch in power, at least, to be able to stream games. And when you're halfway to the price point of just buying an Xbox Series S, it doesn't make a lot of sense not to just buy the Series S. You pay $250 for a Series S, and over the course of 2 or 3 years, getting used games, trading games, renting games out from a library, you will recover the difference compared to a streaming service where you're going to pay through the monthly a set amount to stream games, and then you still won't really own those games at the end of that experience. Let's see. Moving on, PlayStation VR pre-orders start today, and you can now register for an invite if you're interested in that. Marvin the Martian and the Game of Thrones stage are coming to Multiversus if you're interested in that. Overwatch 2 mid-season patch has been delayed due to a critical issue, which, yeah, Overwatch 2's launch seems to be not going very smoothly. Shigeru Miyamoto turned 70 years old today, which, yeah, I don't know if that's super surprising. I mean, that kind of looks like a 70-year-old Japanese man to me. He'll probably try to work late into his 80s, but his timer is ticking. Certainly, at some point he will either have to retire or die, and once his influence out of Nintendo is gone, we may see some major changes as far as the Mario franchise and just how Nintendo is run. Secretly, it feels like Shigeru Miyamoto has way more influence because of his seniority than he really should, considering he's not the president and he's not on the board. I think even if there is a board, it's a private company. I guess it doesn't have a board, or I think it's a private company. Moving on, Warzone 2 70GB update is now live on consoles if you're interested in that. Here we go. Pokemon the Trading Card Live has launched in open beta on PC and mobile. The card collecting game replaces the 2010's Tokyo Card Game Online app. Do we have a real video of it? No. But it looks fairly nice. As far as this one screenshot, that's all we've got here. Players can migrate their collection from the Pokemon Card Game Online app, though some are reporting issues with the importer tool during the beta phase. So yeah, I'm gonna check this out, but I can't imagine I really would just want to play Pokemon. It's a little awkward, frankly. It's already a little awkward that we're looking at adult games coming out on Steam and perhaps overemphasizing the adult games coming out on Steam. But it would be very awkward to be playing a kid's card game like Pokemon and then like come over here and show Pokemon and then come over here and talk about a adult sex game. That would be a little weird. I wouldn't be surprised if the the YouTube algorithm flagged things like that or saw a problem with that too. Xbox Live is now 20 years old, which, you know, that's pretty long time. Time flies, I guess, when you're having fun, or if you're not having fun either. Either way. Xbox Game Pass Ultimate members get 3 months of Apple TV Plus and Apple Music trials. Subscribers can claim and activate both free trials before March 31st, 2023. Which, that's an interesting deal considering how Microsoft is still siding with Epic in that lawsuit, but I guess that just goes to show these big corporations make these kinds of deals all the time. And I guess inherently Microsoft knows that they don't have a music or TV service to really compete. We may see more of this kind of awkward bundling or free trials happening as the economy gets more and more desperate to get their numbers up, because yeah, what we really need to see is companies finally break away from just constantly trying to satisfy their investors with bigger numbers, bigger user bases, and finally say, look, we're just gonna have to say we've saturated the market. We can't get new users. We can't squeeze blood from the stone anymore. We can make reasonable profits each month, but we can't make increased profits every month non-stop. Apparently Sony's God of War studio is currently spread out on a lot of different things, but Ragnarok director says he'd work on Santa Monica Studios' flagship series for life, which, boy, is that not saying anything. Although it does seem weird that one studio would be spread out on a lot of different things. That they should be focusing on one, maybe 2 games as one studio, really just one. I can't really even imagine a scenario where you should be working on 2 different games as one studio. But inherently, I guess what he's trying to hint at here is that don't expect another God of War game for a while from Sony Santa Monica, or whatever studio this is. Yeah, Santa Monica studio. That's probably for the better too. This God of War reboot series worked for 2 games. It, just like the Lara Croft series reboot, worked for a couple of games, and now it's time to hand over the series to a different company that might have more interest in doing something different. I wouldn't be surprised if you were to kind of make a throwback and try and make a God of War series that is much closer to the original God of War games than the reboot. In the same way, I wouldn't be surprised if at some point they make a throwback of a Lara Croft series that is much closer to the original Tomb Raider games instead of the reboot. Otherwise, they'll just sit on it and try and do something slightly different, but not that different. Let's see. FIFA 23 patch notes, lengthy meta is over for next gen. Check out that article if you're interested. Is this all girls playing here? I guess this is supposed to be a girl too. Like, it'd be weird if there was just like one guy and then a bunch of girls on the pitch. But yeah. This is, I believe, the first year that they've had the girls teams in FIFA. Ubisoft and Riot team up for a research project targeting toxicity in online games. Companies say cross-industry collaboration is key to help curbing harmful content. which, yeah, I mean, I guess communication is better than not communication, and perhaps with more people, cooler heads will prevail. This might also be very much a case where once they try to collaborate and you see that there's a bunch of like crazy people who are obsessed with toxicity existing in video games, mixed with another group of crazy people who are obsessed with toxicity in video games, it might, once they're all put in a room, show that they're all crazy and discredit the entire concept and dissolve with no real progress or action to be taken. I don't know if there really is any progress as far as toxicity in video games. There are definitely toxic people in the world. Certainly, I can get that far, and some percentage of the toxic people in the world will play video games. But how do you stop that? How do you force anybody to think or act or do anything in any way? Particularly if you're not a government and you can't throw people in jail, and you shouldn't throw people in jail just for being negative or toxic, whatever toxic really means. It's such a nebulous term. This could lead to bad things, but I imagine it will lead to absolutely nothing. If anything, it might just come to a realization that it would be nice if they came to a realization that it's not that big of an issue, but it definitely is that big of an issue. The obsession with toxicity in video games, starting from the assumption that there's a fact there, and not even taking a step back or being open to the idea that maybe some games don't really have that many toxic players and it's not really a problem. The assumption that it's a problem is the first mistake, certainly, and a problem in itself. A similar story I heard, apparently someone was interviewed to work at G4, and one of the questions they were asked was, why should Batman be canceled? Not should Batman be canceled, and by canceled they don't mean cancel the comic book series, they mean SJW cancel culture canceled. And the person being interviewed was just like set it back, and they're like, what do you mean? Why should Batman be canceled? And the interviewer goes, because he's a rich white man, and a minority doing what he did would not be allowed to do it. Which, in all fairness, if Batman existed in the real world, regardless of whether he was rich or white, he wouldn't be allowed to act as a vigilante or do half the things he can do, because they're all fictional things that can only happen in a comic book. We do have vigilantes that try to be costume vigilantes, and they're just pathetic, and they don't do anything usually, and if they do actually try to do anything that the police are supposed to do, the police immediately arrest them because the police don't want to be shown up and they don't want their authority taken away, and there's kind of a good reason for that too. Like, you can't have unaccountable people. The police are already way too unaccountable. Last thing you need is unaccountable people running around beating up or arresting people without training or authority. But yeah, that was one of the interview questions. And then another one of the interview questions later on is, besides Batman, who else should be what other comic book characters should be canceled? Which, these are just weird interview questions for somebody that's supposed to be a host of G4 and talk about video games. It really seems like you can only take that these were questions to find crazy SJWs, which is what they got mostly in Frost, I imagine, is a crazy SJW ideologue in G4, is that they were looking for that. The interviewers were looking for that. People in California in general are just kind of looking for that. They love the groupthink. They love the SJW concept. They've embraced it fully. But yeah, those might have been interesting questions phrased a little bit differently if you were hiring somebody to be a comic book reviewer at G4, which isn't a terrible thought, but they didn't do anything with comic books. But you would definitely not start with the assumption that Batman should be canceled. The question should be, do you think Batman would be canceled in the real world or should be canceled as far as cancel culture in the real world? There's also equally a good question, do you think the Batman comics should be canceled if you were interviewing for a comic? But yeah, it just seems really dumb when the questions you would ask to hire somebody to work as a presenter at G4 is like, how many video games do you play in a month, in a year, or how often do you beat video games? Do you 100%? What video games have you 100% beaten and gotten all the achievements for? Do you care about achievements? What type of video games do you like to play? Do you play with friends or do you play alone? Like, you would ask video game questions for a video game presenter. Or if you didn't care about that and you just wanted somebody that can read the teleprompter, which maybe some of the presenters should have just been people that can read a teleprompter really good, you would go, what kind of theatrical experience do you have? Can you act? Can you read off a teleprompter? Can you do an emotional speech? Can you do a dispassionate speech if that's necessary? It's usually not necessary to do a dispassionate speech. But yeah, that would be much smarter things to talk about. Unfortunately, it really is getting to the point where an amazing investigative piece will happen at some point, just showing all the things that were done wrong with G4. But until we get to that investigative piece, the little trickles feel a little bit too much like dancing on the grave of G4. And fair enough if you do want to dance on the grave of G4, because they really did set a lot of people's expectations far too high and hopes that you did the worst thing you could possibly do by giving people hope and then dashing it on a failed project with bringing back G4. And so, yeah, there are going to be people that are just going to consistently be dancing on the grave and unhappy about that. And there's not too much you can do to avoid that, really. But it still gets to the truth of the matter is that you just really can't make something like G4. Doesn't matter how much money you have, you're not going to get kids to watch TV. And you were building a service that felt like it was TV first. And once you get past that point and get away from the idea of making TV, then you start to make a YouTube channel. And once you start to make a YouTube channel, that's done in a much more cheaper, efficient manner with far fewer people. And there's just a maximum level of quality that you can get there. I suppose as far as YouTube, it should also be mentioned that apparently Mr. Beast passed the number of subscribers that PewDiePie had. I assume that the PewDiePie and Mr. Beast are still far below some of the other channels that, like the that Indian channel that PewDiePie was fighting against when the whole meme of subscribe to PewDiePie was happening. I imagine that Indian channel that was automatically subscribing people still exists and has more subscribers. I imagine there's some music channels out there that people have more subscribers to or more views to. It kind of doesn't matter one way or the other as far as who is the biggest subscriber. And PewDiePie has long since stopped being a gamer YouTuber, if he ever really was a gamer YouTuber, and is now more of a lifestyle in Japan YouTuber, if anything. Moving on, Xbox's November update lets players join Discord voice channels directly from the console. It also includes Discord audio improvements and updated wishlist features. It's funny how they're integrating Discord when really Microsoft Teams should be trying to connect to Xbox, and yet there really is no push there for Microsoft Teams. Or I think Microsoft also owns Skype. Maybe they don't. But yeah, Discord is the chat service at the moment that most people want to get with. But notably, Discord's been out for a while, and it really hasn't acted too much as a replacement for something like a forum or a Twitter for most people. Even as Twitter is potentially falling apart, there's more talk around going to something like Mastodon and a non-federated services, which is too complicated, I think, for most people. Let's see. The Grammy Awards reveal nominees for a new video game soundtrack prize. 64th annual Grammys will be held on February 2023. In February 2023. Is there a specific day? February 5th? So, Aliens Firestorm Elite, Assassin's Creed Valhalla, Call of Duty Vanguard, Marvel's Guardian of the Galaxy, and Old World. I don't even know what Old World is. Grammys, I assume, trying to make themselves relevant by adding this single category, and I assume that they are only going to give awards for new things and not just old songs or putting old songs in video games. Inherently, as far as prestige, for decades now, video games have been taking popular music songs and putting them in their video games, and not the opposite. There's I don't think ever been a case where a video game original song has been put into movies or even soundtracks that sold that well or anything like that. There was a couple of cases where that could have been the case, certainly, where video game music could have been in Wreck-It Ralph more, or Pixels, which that was a terrible movie, but that's not how directors think. Directors inherently, I imagine there's less than a dozen directors that play video games or have ever even played a single video game in the past decade, so they wouldn't have heard video game music to even think about it. And most video game music is not interesting in the first place, so it's no surprise it never crosses over and gets reused for anything else. The licenses in video game music may also be somewhat restrictive on the composer, so they can't potentially pay a composer to score something and then use that score in a different form of medium. You would think, like the Last of Us TV show will have some song that is somewhat similar to the songs in the Last of Us game, but I wouldn't be surprised if that's not really how it goes. Inherently, though, it kind of boils down to the Grammys being irrelevant and music scores in video games being minimally relevant, too close to irrelevant. Like, music is just not a big deal in video games. If music was a big deal, then we would have had a lot more gamers with surround sound systems. It would have been a much bigger there would be much more of an emphasis around surround sound being the default way to play games, with a 5.1 surround sound at least, if not a 9.2 Dolby Atmos surround sound being the design. And while those things are supported in consoles, they're not particularly supported that well with games. They're not promoted as features in the games, and it just comes down to people don't care about music or sound that much. So we had the Doom composer come out with a 1,400 word allegation, just a lot of receipts, and the length of the allegations and the actionability around the allegations, and that he could be sued if he was actually lying, made me lean to believe him. And then there was no response for a couple days. Now Bethesda has come out and saying they're rejecting the Doom composer's mistreatment allegations, and then they say that's incited threats of violence, which that's something that really even shouldn't be bothered to report on, because that's just mudslinging and the standard, oh, somebody on the internet has said something mean to me because this person made a legitimate allegation. I'm still heavily leaning into believing the Doom composer. The publisher claims it's ready to disclose its own evidence, quote, in an appropriate venue as needed, which is to say they are not willing to come out and put out receipts. Inherently, this might very well be a case where Bethesda higher-ups who have issued this strongly worded statement may be backing up the manager because they believe the manager, because the manager themselves, who was at the center of the allegations, is just lying through his teeth, and they may just believe it. It might also be that Bethesda as a corporation is just backing up the manager because corporations always side with the manager. So yeah, the manager I'm talking about is the director, Marty Stratton. But yeah, 14,000 word statement. Compared to Bethesda saying, well, we'll sue you, which is basically what they're saying, is that we're going to bring our own evidence when we sue this guy, which is really all they can say. Inherently, this is the wrong response for Bethesda, regardless of whether these allegations are true or not. Bethesda needs to say, it's much better for Bethesda to say, we take all allegations extremely seriously, and we have immediately instituted an internal review with our HR to see if there's any validity to these allegations at all. Please bear with us and treat everyone fairly. Assume everyone is innocent until proven guilty, and allow us the time to get to the center of this. And then you just kind of hope that it goes away, and then you just have your HR department find no fault on the part of the company. Or if it's so egregious that you do find ridiculous amounts of fault on the company, you throw the director under the bus and fire him. To come out this harsh and back him up really does lead to a fighting attitude that you may, for a fight you may really not want to fight. And yeah, trying to be as balanced as possible, even though I do kind of believe the composer. We have to admit, people are crazy. COVID has driven people crazy. The economy has driven people crazy. Politics have driven people crazy. So it is very possible that the composer just went crazy and there was a fight. It's very possible the director went crazy and there was a fight. It's very possible they both went crazy and got into a fight. And I'm saying people now are crazy as if they weren't before, but people were always crazy. It was just not so public before. Like, you don't end up in a civil war or a revolutionary war unless there's at least a significant number of people willing to fight at the drop of a hat and fight over certain things that I guess maybe Civil War and Revolutionary Wars are bad examples because those are things probably worth fighting over. But we're just getting little quote mines here as far as Bethesda from Video Games Chronicle saying it was a distortion of the truth is the actual quote. Let's see. The full statement here from Bethesda, if we get away from the... let's see. They could be trying to do some wiggle words, saying he both mischaracterized and misrepresented the team at id Software, saying team instead of the director, the development of Doom Eternal, Marty Stratton and Chad Mossholder, with a one-sided and unjust account of an irreparable professional relationship. So it definitely feels like there's hurt feelings all over the place, and they're naming some other people that don't even seem like those were the people he was complaining about most. We are aware of all the details and history in this matter and unequivocally support Marty, Chad, and the team at id Software. So that they're just siding with the team. We reject the distortion of the truth and selective presentation of incomplete, quote, facts. We stand ready with full and complete documented evidence to disclose in an appropriate venue as needed. So we're going to sue him. So apparently they had an internal review already and found themselves innocent. The problem here is I just cannot possibly believe a corporation. Like, I can't believe a team. I can't believe a couple of people. Not when you're working for a company. Not when the company can fire you if you don't lie and side with what the company's reinterpretation of the facts are. I have to just really lean and side with the middleman. You don't come out with a 14,000 word statement unless you're not afraid of being sued. And so that kind of boldness either is a level of just total insanity or being righteous. And I have to just assume righteousness there as far as the composer. Let's see. And then they throw in the usual nonsense. Any threats or harassment directed toward members of our teams will be met with swift and appropriate action to protect the health and safety, which this has nothing to do with the composer. They're just trying to create a logical fallacy here that if somebody on the internet, whatever, says something nasty, we're going to consider that a threat or harassment, and we're going to blame the composer. We remain incredibly proud of id's previous collaborations with Mick Gordon and ask the fans to refrain from reaching conclusions based on his account and, more importantly, from attacking any individuals mentioned on either side, including Marty, Chad, or Mick. Yeah. But see, the fact that it took a week or a couple days for them to respond, like, is showing that they were not able to just immediately deny this. If this is the way you're going to go, which I still don't think this is the right way to go. Even if you had an internal review and had already decided that the composer was totally in the wrong, you probably still would want to just try and either not comment at all or say we're going to re-review the facts and see if maybe we missed something. But you would do it quickly. You would respond almost immediately to this. Even if you're just going to say, we are investigating and we will have a comment on these allegations shortly, instead of basically saying no comment for several days and then coming out so hard and saying it's totally wrong. it definitely feels like the director who was at the core of the allegations of toxicity was also at the core of this response. And if anything, it kind of echoes the allegations of toxicity that I think were in this 14,000 word statement. Although, in all fairness, if I was a real journalist, I would have actually read all 14,000 words of this statement, and I didn't. But yeah, if you say somebody's, it's almost a catch-22. But if you say somebody's a jerk, and then that person comes back and says, "Screw you, you're a jerk," well then you've kind of proven they are a jerk. Like you have to be incredibly calm and smart if somebody accuses you of being mean or a jerk, so that you don't come off as a jerk in your response. And that's where you come off with very often disingenuous responses that work better, though, to say, "I'm sorry you felt that way. I'll try to improve that. I'll try to keep an eye out to see if I see these kinds of behaviors in myself, and if I do see it, I will actively work to curb it." You have to just say something like that. You could say, "I'm sorry you felt that way, but after a lot of soul searching, I do not believe that I actually am the way you're representing me, and perhaps you should do some soul searching, seek some mental help if that is how you're perceiving reality, because you're not." You can phrase it in kind of a funny way to call somebody crazy and just straight up try and gaslight them, even if you are a jerk, or set them on the path of reality if they are already crazy and perceiving things, which inherently this fight could just be one person is kind of crazy, for lack of a better term, and they are perceiving reality in a completely different way than the way everybody else is perceiving reality. And that happens. Like, most people know this happens. Like, one teenage boy feels like he is being friendly and just goofing on people and trashing on people. Another teenage boy is getting trashed and feels like he's being bullied. Happens all the time, where people just have different perspectives and don't have a objective perspective between the two of them to see what's really going on. But yeah, I do think this is Bethesda's response is too late and totally the wrong response, and a lot of it probably also comes from just the fact that humans tend to side with the side they hear first. So coming out early if you're going to make allegations seems to be the right move, although it didn't work for Helena Taylor. If you were to compare the two, the difference there is that Platinum Games stayed quiet, at least publicly stayed quiet, and then very possibly leaked the actual true accountings to two different news sources, showing the real contracts and showing how Helena Taylor's claims of events were not accurate at all. Plus, Helena Taylor disappeared. I guess if we see the Doom composer disappear and not fight back again, which he probably will, because he really has to now. He just has to keep on pushing, like push, and until it ends up in a court in a lawsuit, until Bethesda actively sues him. You got to just keep on pushing to not back down. But yeah, Bethesda could have stayed silent for a couple days and then leaked it to Video Games Chronicle as an undisclosed source, leaked it to Bloomberg and Jason Schreier as an undisclosed source. And maybe they tried to do that. You kind of have to assume they may have tried to do that, and Video Games Chronicle and Bloomberg didn't bite because they didn't see enough evidence to side with Bethesda in this case. There seems like there's not actual factual misrepresentations that are happening in the Doom composer's allegations, where there were actual numbers and facts that were being misrepresented and Helena Taylor's accusations. Meanwhile, also, Bayonetta 3 was coming out right when Helena Taylor made these allegations. There's no new Doom game coming out, so the Doom composer doesn't look like he's trying to make a campaign to stop buying Doom Eternal, which is outside of even its launch window at this point. So yeah, and Bayonetta 3 came out and it sold as well, I guess, as it was going to sell, and it was as well received as it was going to be well received. I haven't heard any complaints or accolades for Bayonetta 3. It didn't get nominated for anything, but it wasn't likely that it was going to be nominated for anything. Let's see, moving on. Modern Warfare 2's competitive multiplayer list has been delayed. Check out that article on Video Games Chronicle if you're interested. Now we're into the Gametsu articles. Bandai Namco trademarks Ultimate Ninja Storm Connections in Europe. Witcher Wild Hunt Complete Edition for PS5 and Xbox Series launches December 4th with the free next-gen update for basically everybody, or PS5, Xbox Series, and PC. Forever Sky's early access has been delayed to the first half of 2023. This is the first I think I've heard of this game, Forever Skies. Yeah, it looks like it might visually be a little interesting, but it's probably closer to a Fortnite game than I'd be willing to play. My cushion on my chair is already gone flat. We already talked about the Game Award nominees. I don't think there's really any reason to cover them again. A lot of the same games over and over again being nominated. Bayonetta 3 very possibly was not released early enough to qualify for the Game Awards, which I think that may highlight a problem with the Game Awards in general, is that the nominees for Games of the Year should really be announced somewhere around December 20th, maybe 25th, at least maybe a week after Black Friday, December 1st, and then have a faster system to vote on the games and announce them on December 31st or around there. Otherwise, you do run into a situation where a lot of late Black Friday games are just not going to be out, and even reviewers who have early access aren't going to be able to play them in time. Legend of Heroes Kura no Kisekai 2 Crimson Sin Battle and Story demos are now available in Japan. Virtual reality sword fighting game Altair Breaker is coming to PSVR 2. This is, what would you call this? Like realistic CG? But it kind of comes off almost like, I want to say almost French in its art style. But the problem there of calling some CG French is to really just assume that there's only 2 or 3 animation companies in France, which I think that really is kind of the problem, is that there aren't enough animation companies in a lot of countries to separate the West into smaller subsections. I'm trying to not describe things as being Asian or Eastern art style versus Western art style, even though that kind of makes the most sense in my mind. So I would just call this 3D realistic until I can get a third descriptor that would make some sense more. The game doesn't look that interesting. Virtual reality first person shooter X8 adds a PSVR 2 version, and I guess this would be 2D realistic, although realistic in this case really it would just be saying it's not anime-esque. And that really makes a category, a very, very large category of of animation styles being called 2D realistic. This looks a little cel shaded. But I don't know if that would mean I should describe it as comic book. Even describing something as a comic book art style doesn't really mean anything. There's too many different art styles amongst comic books. I'm constantly struggling with that as a issue in my head. Is just better ways to describe this if I was talking to somebody who was blind, as far as the different art styles, or just a better language to use. We already talked about Thunderfold Games being acquired, or Thunderfold Games acquiring Jumpship. Blue Protocol launches in early spring 2023 in Japan, and a network test is set for January 14th through 16th. This looks like it's a 2D anime art style, obviously. It's an action RPG game. Let's see if we can get a general idea of what it looks like. Yep. Looks a lot like Genshin Impact. That is going to be a shame if all of a sudden I start having to describe things as looking like Genshin Impact, but if something is popular, then it tends to be the thing you describe games as. Metroidvanias are known as Metroidvania because Metroids and Castlevania games were popular. And that makes more sense. Knights of Honor 2 Sovereign launches December 6th for PC, according to Gametsu. Xbox Game Pass adding a bunch of games. We already covered that. Soccer Story launches November 29th for seems like everything. Multiversus Season 2 adds Marvel the Martian, Marvin the Martian as a playable character. The fact that they're adding this character already kind of shows that they're scraping the bottom of the barrel. Like, he definitely is a character that should be in Multiversus, but you're going to get more and more obscure characters. Marvin the Martian, I think probably in the original Looney Tunes series, in the first couple decades, probably only showed up a dozen times or so. He may play a bigger role in later Looney Tunes cartoon series because there's a lot of those that I haven't seen. Star Wars Tales from the Galaxy Edge Enhanced Edition launches February 22nd for the PSVR 2 and PS5, which it sounds like this would be a new product, new adventure game, VR adventure game, but the Enhanced Edition implies to me that there's a not in an Enhanced Edition. Yeah, that's confusing to have an Enhanced Edition when there seems not to be an Enhanced Edition of the game. Let's see. Theatrhythm Final Bar line details its music stages, modes, gameplay styles, and more. This is a rhythm game, obviously. Let's see. You know what? I'm just gonna stand up for a second and just stretch my legs, and it'll just take a second. But 1 sec. Okay, sorry about that, but yeah, it was either my cushion was going to go flatter and flatter and I was just going to start slouching more and more, or just stand up and let the cushions reinflate a little bit. Although they're not really that reinflated. Anyways, because once they go flat, I think it takes several hours for them to spring back. I just need way firmer cushions. Let's see. Moving on, Resident Evil Reverse first major update is now available. It adds a new battle stage village and a playable character Tundra. Which one is Reverse? Is the question. And see, is this supposed to be like these? Are these supposed to be the characters from Resident Evil 5? Because face-wise, they just don't look like the characters. Outfit-wise, they look like the characters, but face-wise, they look completely different. Let's see, it's on Steam. Yeah, Reverse came out in October 2022, and it's mostly negative. And this is the one where it's just players versus players. Yep. See, even in playing Resident Evil 4, you run into the problem of there being these like extra modes that people don't really want to play and often aren't that good. Although it wasn't really until after like Resident Evil 6 that we started to see a lot of that. I will also say, from the screenshots, like Leon here looks better in the fan-made HD project from the screenshots. I imagine if I got the camera really close up there'd be more polygons, but I'm not sure that I think the textures are actually better here. These are fairly generic rough textures all around. This gun is almost one solid color on it. Now, I would say this character, who was more professionally done for the RE3 remake, looks better than Leon, who this almost is like a beta test on what Leon should look like. But I think Leon also is in Resident Evil 3, so there's not really even that good of an excuse. And the Tyrant looks like a monster, so it's kind of hard to compete against any of that or care about what it looks like. Yeah, but yeah, this is the multiplayer game that nobody cares about. And really at some point, it is just going to be, you get Resident Evil Reverse for free when you buy Resident Evil Village. Yeah, that's how they're selling this, is that you pay $40 for this, or you get the gold edition with the Resident Evil Village Winter's expansion, and then a premium pass to unlock all rewards on a premium track of a battle pass for $9, and then a bunch of skins that I'm sure not that many people care about. But then it also requires a Capcom ID and has the Nuvo in it, and a third-party EULA, and it's no surprise that it's mostly negative. But also I think generally there's just not a lot going on here. I don't know if there are even 4 different locations in this game. It seems like it's mostly the police station and maybe a hospital, looking at the screenshots. It kind of just feels like it's the locations that were already in Resident Evil 3 slightly changed so you could run around in circles and loop around and shoot people. And then it's almost certainly just a asynchronous player versus player game with no real story or anything going on. So kind of pointless to throw in a couple more characters and one new location. I guess they have to try and support it, but I would assume Capcom should and has in their hearts already abandoned Resident Evil Reverse. The hope is that Capcom would finally get the message as far as just make the mainline remakes of Resident Evil and make sequels to the mainline story. Quit trying to put multiplayer into it. Quit trying to make microtransactions and live service features. That's not what this series is going to succeed on. There's a whole other multiplayer game that was before Reverse that failed too. So 2 failures in a row, they should learn their lesson. Do Japanese ever learn their lesson? Maybe not. Depends on the company. Capcom may be one of the companies that really doesn't ever learn its lesson there. And it may very well just be a save face thing where they can't tell the Japanese teams that they can't work on Resident Evil at all because that would insult them and demotivate them. So they're giving them these side projects that are awful. But none of it really makes sense. You take the development time and money you spent making the last 2 multiplayer Resident Evil games, and you put that all into the Resident Evil 4 remake, and then they should be announcing a Resident Evil 4 remake is ready to go this Black Friday. But because they didn't do that, we're not getting a Resident Evil 4 remake until at least next year, if not longer. But yeah, that's just wasted resources. You could almost certainly give some part of the remake to the Japanese teams and have them work on some of it and then hand it over to the finalized good team that made Resident Evil Village and Resident Evil 7, which is more of the Western team. Moving on, the line Monster Rancher has been delayed to spring 2023. This is being published or developed by Line Corporation, which is a Asian publisher slash Line also is kind of like a TikTok, Twitter, everything app. Yeah, speaking of Asian companies like Shift Up and Line, because Line worked with Shift Up originally on Destiny Child. Yeah, I think I'm ready to completely install Project Nike off my phone. I have not gone back to it, and I don't have any real desire to go back to it. I still am playing Marvel Snap, which is stupid. I learned something new about Marvel Snap. Once you fully unlock a character and make the frame upgrades, which the last 3 upgrade levels of the 7-level upgrade system in Marvel Snap are just garbage upgrades. They just add more visual effects that aren't really that important. But once you get it to the max, then you can split the card in half and start all over again with a maxed visual version of it. And then so there aren't actually 7 levels of upgrade to every single card. There are 14 levels of upgrade to every single card. And there's really no way without spending money to speed up the process of upgrading cards or getting new cards. And there's really nothing new happening to the game. They are just trying to kind of randomize locations and randomize the experience as much as they can, and they're not really randomizing it much. It frankly has far too many daily quests for as little as most people probably would want to or should play the game. And the daily quests aren't really rewarding you with much. It totally is not a card game I was expecting from Ben Brode. But I'm still kind of addicted to it and wasting some time on it, so I'm not to the point where I'm ready to uninstall that. And I'm still playing the Goblin Mining game, which is really just a time waster, and I shouldn't be playing it either. Yeah, I'm much happier when I waste time watching something on Netflix than I am wasting time playing a game on my phone, but usually I'm doing both at the same time, so there's a little bit of overlap. Moving on with the Gematsu news, Loopers is coming to the PS4 on February 16th. It's currently available on the Switch worldwide and PC and iOS and Android in Japan. This looks like it is a visual novel, I guess. Yeah. I wouldn't have been surprised if it was kind of more of an RPG action game. Famitsu has its review scores for issue 1772, giving Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2 a 33 out of 40, so average, and Omori getting a 29 out of 40, which is pretty low, and only reviewing 2 games this week, which I guess means there aren't a lot of games out, or they are catching up from playing Bayonetta or some other game in the last few weeks. R-Type Tactics 1 and 2 Cosmos has an additional scenario production project Kickstarter campaign launching today. It really sucks. It seems like we're getting back to the idea of Kickstartering games, and I had hoped that that concept would have been completely dead for as awful as it really worked out from almost every game that was Kickstarted. I really can't name any game that really needed to be Kickstarted that was Kickstarted and succeeded. Like, Psychonauts 2 was on Fig, and nobody even mentions Fig as a company anymore. It's so irrelevant. But that's in part because the people that work for Psychonauts 2 also were on the board of Fig. But yeah, I can't think of anything else to even begin to be announced that it came out well. And that's probably a little unfair. I imagine something like Hand of Fate may have been kickstarted and came out well. And there probably were a couple other games that were kickstarted and came out well. But for every one successful game that was kickstarted, there's got to be at least 30 games that came out mediocre or half finished or just never came out in the first place. And R-Type is a great example of a game that just by its description, by its name, couldn't possibly justify being on Kickstarter in the first place. Let's see, Fire Emblem Saga Engage story trailer is available if you want to check this out. This is too anime even for me to have like red hair and blue hair and red eyes and blue eyes and then metal arms, gauntlets, but mostly the face and the hair and the eyes is the problem. That's a little too crazy. SpongeBob SquarePants The Cosmic Shake Languages Are Fun trailer. Is the Cosmic Shake a kids game? I don't think so. I think this is to announce that they have a bunch of voice language support for a bunch of different languages. Yeah, bunch of languages, which when you're starting to get down to the point of this many languages, you have to be a little concerned that Embracer Group maybe is spending too much money for even a SpongeBob SquarePants game, which arguably Embracer Group's most successful release so far has been a SpongeBob SquarePants game. It's unfair certainly, but I would say English and German and French gets you in most of Europe and most of the North America. You add Spanish, whether that's Mexican Spanish or Brazilian Portuguese Spanish, and that gets you most of Central America and Spain, which is part of Europe. Yeah, Japanese, and then that gets you Japan. And if you had perhaps simplified Chinese in that, or Korean, that gets you most of the gaming community in Asia. But once you start adding Polish and Hindi and Indonesian, you've probably wasted your money. Selling your game in Poland is not going to get you enough sales to justify Polish. Hindi and Indonesian run into the problem of there not being that many people that either don't speak English in the countries that would speak Hindi and Indonesian also, or don't play video games, can't afford video games. But yeah, maybe this very well is a case of an exception. Almost certainly it should be just an exception because of SpongeBob SquarePants, and maybe there is just a lot of fandom, more than I think, in places that speak Hindi and Polish and Indonesian. But I definitely would have stopped at Japanese and very possibly not even done Japanese as far as voice languages. Subtitles, sure. Subtitles are much cheaper, but that's a lot of money. Well, we kind of know now that it's usually somewhere between 5,000 to 25,000, depending on the number of days of voice lines that you do. So each of these language, let's just say times 5,000 for a rough estimate. That's running your budget up a little bit, although not that much. That is one thing about Resident Evil 4 that also strikes me, is a lot of Resident Evil 4, as I'm playing it, I don't really remember it. I more have a nostalgic false memory of the game. So when I'm talking to like the shopkeeper, and the shopkeeper actually isn't voicing half of his lines and it's just popping up text, or when you're examining an object in the game and Leon doesn't have a voice line of dialogue there and it just pops up text, that's a little off-putting and surprising, because the points where they do have voice lines of text happen enough that it left the impression that it was 100% voice, and it just totally is not the case at all. Like there's probably 2/3 of all the dialogue in the game is not voiced. And like the shopkeeper is a great example of that, because you go into one menu and he goes, "What are you buying?" You go into another menu and he goes, "What are you selling?" You sell something that's really expensive, he'll say, "I buy that for a high price." And he repeats just those 4 or 5 lines enough, it feels like he actually is completely talking to you. Sorry, I had to cough there. But he isn't really talking to you. Not really. He's just repeating catchphrases over and over again. Moving on, we got a couple more Gamatsu articles. Monster Hunter Rise Sunbreak expansion title update 3 launches November 24th, according to Gamatsu. A romance visual novel, Omaide Kakaete I Ni Koi, is coming to PS4 and Switch on February 22nd, 2023 in Japan. It definitely seems like it is a little bit more of a moe visual novel of anime girls. 2D moe art style, I guess is what you call it. Yep. We're getting less and less of these announcements. I really feel like last year we had a lot more. This was first released on PC in September in 2021. Does that mean it's on Steam, though? Seems not to be on Steam. So yeah, usually when they say first release launched on PC and it doesn't have a Steam link, that means it is being sold directly or sold on some other site. And if anything, this probably does highlight how there has been some progress made, at least as far as visual novels coming to Steam or platforms where Western PC gamers might actually play them. whereas up until this point, even a couple years ago, most visual novels were being sold only to really Japanese audiences directly through websites, like individual websites, and not on the Steam platform, which even in 2021, Steam was the de facto place to go to get video games. But the Japanese are just slow to adopt or change. A game called Graze Counter GM launches January 8th in 2023. Here's a very moe character with red eyes and blue eyes and angel wings and a halo and twin tails. But I would say this is not too anime because at least it is artistically sticking within a color palette of red and blue and not just crossing the lines so much. If the hair here was red and blue, that would be too much. Even if one twin tail was red and one twin tail was blue, or one wing was red or one was blue, that would be too much. Notice that you really are pushing it here with a blue background moon, blue wings, and blue hair, and still it is readable and not crazy looking. Maybe it's a case that in the other character with his hair being half red and half blue, that those two characters are that character is a fusion of two other characters, one with red hair and one with blue hair. But even at that, that's not how I would depict that. A game called Front Mission First Remake has a second gameplay trailer if you want to check that out. And then a company called Garena is going to publish Black Clover M Rise of the Wizard King in select markets globally. It's a smartphone game based on an anime. I think the Black Clover anime is pretty popular, so the mobile game has a chance of succeeding. No real guarantee. And then Marvel Midnight Suns has a Welcome to the Abbey trailer, which is this is like the first time we've seen any characters in Midnight Suns not covered in gold armor, which that seemed to be visually just the theme, is that everybody would be in gold armor, and then the sub theme from what I can gather is that this is Marvel characters in an alternate universe that tend to be maybe a little bit more evil, but not that evil, or maybe just a little bit more hardcore. This very possibly is Tony Stark here, and you wouldn't even recognize him. I don't know if maybe this is supposed to be T'Challa or someone else. I think this is supposed to be Captain Marvel. This obviously is Wolverine. This probably is Captain America, but I don't know if this is supposed to be a just completely different looking Doctor Strange or different magical character, and I don't know if this is supposed to be the Enchantress or a different magical character. They seem to be holding hands, but that could be wrong. These two characters can be completely disconnected. So, like, when you can't for certain identify anybody, that's kind of a problem, other than Wolverine. And I think that's going to be a repeated problem for a lot of the Marvel games, the licensed Marvel games, is that they need to get a consistent likeness, even if it can't look exactly like the actors in the Marvel movies, which really it should just look like the characters in the Marvel movies, but they probably don't want to pay for that. Regardless, there needs to be like a consistent on-character model way in which characters are depicted in the Marvel comic books, and there needs to be a consistent way they're depicted in video games, and those two should be very similar, if not exactly the same. Alright. So we may have a lot of games to go through on Steam today, so even my fascination with adult games, I'm going to try to commit to. moving through those very quickly. This kind of feels like a Heroes of Might and Magic game. I'll give it a follow. But do I want to do a YouTube short? If anything, I think I am going to try to just make more YouTube shorts. Like, as much as I know some people are going to hate that, I think flooding my channel with as many as 3 a day is doable, and certainly I could go higher. Last Kids on Earth. I do have a question as far as whether this game or that series has relevance. Netflix has this way of potentially trying convincing you that something is popular when it really isn't, which that works fairly well for Netflix in that you can watch something and enjoy it and feel like other people are watching it and enjoying it. If you need that kind of justification in your life, this looks interesting. Tad the Lost Explorer. But that can also certainly cause a problem. Stranger Things undeniably is really popular, but everything else may very well just be a niche on a niche. Here we have an adult game. The Impregnation of the Elves, Conquest of the Arrogant Fairies by Impregnation. It's a flat 2D. It's a 2D anime elf character game. You seem to be playing as this green ogre who is just like having sex with these elf anime characters, and that seems to be straight up the fighting mechanic, is that you're just Johnson out attacking the characters in some way. So it's kind of an RPG, JRPG game. It's $9.89, Japanese full audio, English subtitles, and a bunch of other languages. Yeah. It's an interesting adult game, I'll say, in that it's actually going with an RPG element. I imagine there's a lot of visual novel stuff also in it, but I'm not really seeing that much. It's really showing quite a bit of adult content, so it's also rated mostly positive. So that's one on the scales, I guess, of more anime style games. Then you have anime inspired games like Ruby Arrowfell here from the Way Forward, which that deserves a follow. I don't feel like the Ruby series really deserves to be something you should be interested in, but Way Forward is actually pretty good at making games. So they may elevate a subpar series, niche series, to the point of being playable. It would at least be more playable than just a random indie game that might be good or might be bad, and you just wouldn't have any reviews to ever tell you, so you would have no idea. This looks like some kind of chess game. A chess game where kings have magical powers. Okay. Anything that changes chess has a little bit of an interest. A free trial for Perseus Titan Slayer. Now you don't see this very often when you have a game that is just a free trial of a game, or a game being labeled as a free trial, and it says it's free to play single player. So you would have to assume that there's another game called Perseus that they already have available for sale, but no. Interesting. Well, the problem there is Perseus Titan Slayer just didn't look that interesting enough to justify even looking at a free trial. And if I did play the free trial, it doesn't look like you can play the full game yet. Maybe in a couple days they'll release the full game. Inherently, because of the 2-hour no question asked refund policy on Steam, every game is potentially a free trial for the first 2 hours, and that makes the whole shopping experience way better than having demos or free trials exist separately. This is a Japanese only visual novel RPG maker type game. It did have a little bit of a different feel to it, but obviously I can't put it on the fall list if it doesn't support English. And yeah, I guess if I was going to really try to expand YouTube Shorts, I might try to also include games that don't support English. But I don't see a real reason to do that because inherently my channel is English, it's labeled as English, all the content I'm making is in English, so there's just that assumption that has to be made first and foremost. This looks like a cook serve delicious game. And it's free to play with in-app purchases, so I'm gonna say no to that. Yeah, another tower defense game. It doesn't look terrible for a tower defense game. In the same way as I'm only going to cover English games, I'm also not going to cover tower defense games. Cowardice doesn't look animated well enough to say yes to. Halloween Pumpkins coming out November 16th, so missing Halloween by 2 weeks plus. The Building of Cats is just a hidden object game, which are getting too many of those. Card Fight Vanguard Dear Days. Is this even a multiplayer game? It says it has online PvP. But to play it, you would have to pay $70. That seems crazy. It does have a demo, and again, this is like a really great example of why you wouldn't need to put a free trial out. It seems to me like you buy the cards and it's more of a deck building game than a trading card game. I do think Card Fight Vanguard is fairly popular in Japan, and maybe it's the one that has a lot of crossover cards, but I just don't think it has a lot of popularity outside of Japan, and that monetization of starting with $70 before you can even look at it is a pretty big eliminator. But I will make a YouTube short around it. This is probably a no as a JRPG game, but I'll give it a chance. Goodbye World. Looks like it's an RPG Maker game. Seems like it has enough to deserve a short. This is a horror visual novel. Fairly cheap with full Japanese audio. Just trying to burn through all these fairly quickly, so commentary is going to be less than even usual. The good news is most of this is garbage, but I'll give this a chance. This looks like it's a card game based on fish in the oceans. There is something to that that might be interesting. At least a chance of that might be maybe being interesting. I'm still struggling with the way things work with the Firefox, but I have made Firefox my default browser now. I got tired of clicking on links and opening Chrome and then basically having to crash Chrome or restart my computer to close Chrome to restore the pages later if I ever do open Chrome again. But otherwise, that's really the only problem I've had so far is that clicking to move tabs around. Interesting, you can't put this on the follow list for some reason. Actually don't even have that many games. So maybe I did skip over some games on Monday, but I don't know for sure. Here's a game that's tagged hentai, doesn't actually have any adult content in it. General mature content is all it says it has. And it looks like it is just a slide puzzle game with some anime characters. Yeah, in like bikinis. A 3D slide puzzle elements, which doesn't really help in any way. We're not seeing a lot of adult content games. We saw one anime adult game and seemingly nothing else, and I'm about done, assuming I didn't skip a bunch, which maybe I did skip a bunch over the weekend because my algorithm messed up. I don't know. I guess maybe I did. Feels like I did. Well, this looks like this might be something. So yeah. I guess there's just no recovering it though. Yeah. But even between now, I mean Monday and now, that's not a lot of adult games. GameDeveloper.com, Sony files patent for NFT and blockchain technology. I bet none of these articles really get deep into what the actual patent says, because it would be hard to explain what the patent says even if you knew what it said. Let's see. Assassin's Creed Valhalla and Call of Duty Vanguard soundtracks among the Grammy nominees. We kind of covered that already from other sources. A lost console version of Simcopter 64 has been found and preserved, which this would have been the first console game that Maxis would have put out if it had come out. Online messaging service Line launches a platform for Web3 games, which is NFT games at this point. That's all that Web3 means. We're going to have to just jump to Web 4, and inherently somebody's going to say Web 4 means something else. There was a lot of talk many decades ago about a Web 2.0. I'm not sure that whatever they were promoting as a Web 2.0 even ever got embraced. I guess generally, if you're just trying to label something as Web 3, Web 4, Web 2.0, it implies that that you really don't have a more interesting description of the technology or idea behind the technology that you can sell. Whereas the Quick protocol or the Fido protocol, which are Quick is going to try and have better DNS encryption and better traffic and faster transmission of network packets, and then the Fido protocol is trying to have better two-factor authentication. Like, those are two technologies in comparison to Web 3, which is just this generic description of nothing. And Quick and Fido stand for something. I couldn't tell you what they stand for, where Web 3 really doesn't stand for anything. Moving on, GameDeveloper.com says Xbox shelved Keystone streaming stick because it would have been too expensive, which this is an example of a bad headline in my opinion. I think it's inaccurate to say that they've shelved the project. Maybe they've shelved the streaming stick concept, but they haven't shelved the entire idea of having a streaming device that is cheap, relatively cheap, between $100 and $130. But yeah, they said they were still working on it, so, or at least the general idea of it. Let's see. Microsoft Flight Sim head credits cloud release with the game's popularity boom, which I guess is a great way to bolster your cloud services, which Microsoft is definitely trying to promote quite a bit in flight simulators. Definitely a game that they were definitely trying to use to promote their cloud services. New Xbox update lets player join Discord voice chats directly from the console. We already talked about that. And then Bethesda called Mick Gordon's allegations against id Software unjust. And GameDeveloper.com. Here you can see a big wall of black text with logos around it, and yeah, that seems perhaps not the best way to put a wall of text either. The whole tweet longer in a picture concept, I just don't really get it. Yeah, is it such a danger that somebody might change the wording of just an actual tweet where you could just copy and paste it? Or is it intentional that they don't want it to be searchable in Google for like specific phrases? Like the whole thing just kind of doesn't make sense in modern days. Almost certainly you could scan every image on Twitter and turn that into text if necessary. So I don't really get the picture, other than the picture generally implies this is something big and important we want to talk about. But then also I don't get the idea of doing a logo. Like, what's this little square in front of Bethesda supposed to mean? What's this little square here supposed to mean? Why is this all on the border? Why is it white text on a black background? That seems kind of imposing and stronger than it probably should be. But that is certainly nitpicking, but I don't quite follow it. I don't know what kind of PR company told them to do it that way. Alright, well, these would be fall list games to do fall list cleanup. A puzzle game with 2 user reviews. One of which is positive. If ever a game was okay and sort of interesting, it's this. It's only okay. There's no thumb for that. Well, I think that's a damning with faint praise review. I do like the general idea of being able to look at a bunch of art paintings. The one thing that was weird when I was watching Warrior Nun a couple days ago is that they had like the exact same painting twice right next to each other. So some props guy thought it would be smart to just put the exact image on a museum wall next to the exact image on the mirror wall, which that doesn't make any sense at all. Even if you had a collection and there are 2 copies of the same painting, which those do exist sometimes, I don't think you put it side by side next to each other. And in this case it felt like there was 2 or 3 paintings that were side by side to each other. It might be interesting to perhaps have a image, a lens of sorts. This rhythm game. Like if you could take two pictures and put a lens over it so you could see the exact things that are the same and the differences, that might be interesting. But usually copies of the same picture look so close to each other that you're not supposed to compare and contrast them. Usually it's just like one is sent to one place, to one museum, and another sent to another museum so more people can see it. I guess I'm going to put this musical story on the wish list, but in all fairness, as a potential rhythm game, yeah, I'm not sure I could really play it. So I'm cautiously putting it on the wish list. Murmur in the trees can leave the follow list. Mirror puzzle game. I guess I'll give more time to. Memoir Blue. It's rated very positively. Is that of early access? Yes, so that can go on the wish list. Of course, it feels very ridiculous to potentially grow the wish list when I'm playing Resident Evil 4, just an old game. But I guess playing any game is making progress through my wish list and through my backlog of games. This game alone is going to be a no, but it does remind me that I watched Enola Holmes 2. Which, yeah, for what it is, it's alright as a fictionalized spin-off of a fictionalized series of Sherlock Holmes books, in which it's the younger sister of Sherlock Holmes, and you're focusing really on her, and it's rah-rah feminism in a time where rah-rah feminism really wouldn't have existed. Do I want to give this more time? I would say that the first Enola Holmes movie was probably better by a couple of paces. Yeah, we can get rid of this off the follow list compared to the second one, because the first Enola Holmes movie is about her trying to find her mother, and then the second movie is just Enola Holmes taking a missing persons case for somebody else and eventually gets wrapped into a bigger conspiracy, and I guess that's what happened in the first movie, so fairly formulaic between the two movies. Watching them back to back is probably a mistake. You should probably take at least a week between watching the first one and the second one. And I would hardly call it excellent cinema. It's okay cinema. It's good enough cinema. It's something I would sit down and watch with like a little girl, and they would probably love it. But a teenage boy probably would be bored out of their minds. Let's see. This game, A Day, I think I'm going to take it off the follow list, just because it's not that relevant. But I don't want to take it off the follow list, so I'm going to just give it more time and think about it some more. The truth is, so many games are get removed from the follow list anyways, that being a little bit more generous actually does work. Alright, and with that, that is the last thing, last follow list game, so I just need to look through my Twitter and see if anything new happens, and then that'll be the end of this stream. Yeah, unfortunately, it does seem like we skipped some games that came out over the weekend, but we're back on track now. And ideally, that'll be the only time that happens, or that happens infrequently enough. So I'm scrolling down my Twitter feed, seeing if there's anything new. I'm still seeing some Twitter posts. So Twitter as a news source for me works very well, but as actually somebody who posts on Twitter, the engagements, retweets, comments are just completely non-existent. I honestly don't think anybody has ever commented on a single post to my Twitter feed or like DM'd me for anything other than a couple times where game developers have DM'd me. So yeah, it definitely seems like if you were going to try and promote anything as a content creator on Twitter, you probably would have to pay through the nose. Facebook is kind of in the same position. It's like, I have Facebook, Tumblrs, all these like automated systems where you can watch my videos where you want to watch them, but as far as driving engaging back to my YouTube channel, driving subscriptions, driving even engagements on those platforms, it's just 100% non-existent. There's no interaction there. I don't know if I really want a Twitter where people would, just random people would comment and interact with me. I probably do at my level. Like, I don't get enough people on the chat saying anything, so more comments at other places would be fine. But at a certain point it would just waste a bunch of time. So yeah, whatever the next Twitter is, I would like it to be more of a platform though for your average Joe. I suppose it's worth mentioning, I'm not even about to show it, but Microsoft Teams, their little Zoom competitor, is adding a bunch of games. I guess we can show it. Games for work into Microsoft Teams, which I don't see why most businesses would like that. Like, you're trying to sell Teams to not the individual workers as much as you're trying to sell Teams to the managers, the bosses. And I can't imagine the bosses are going to say, hey, let's get together and let's play a Scrabble with multiple people playing inside the same office, or let's play solitaire and have a solitaire tournament, because that's really what this seems like it's doing, is it's trying to add a multiplayer aspect in between an office. And sure, I can see some people going, oh, this is good team building for an hour or two, but if you were doing that every day, it's just the managers are going to eventually realize that everybody's wasting a bunch of time, and they might as well just be home, go home early, if you don't really need them to do work. Inherently, that is the problem with working a lot of jobs, is that your actual productivity is way less than the amount of hours your boss wants you to be there. And if the boss was just more realistic, he would have people going home early and saving on electricity, turning off the air conditioner because everybody shut up the office an hour early every day. And that's why when you see the real, the real accountants, people who run the numbers, like banks, you start getting bankers' hours, because it is just not necessary or efficient to to have a bank open in the hours that people would like them to be open. Susan Wojcicki is talking about YouTube Black Voices class of 2023. So, yeah. She's still being really interested in SJW and minorities being on the channel, and SJW ideas being prominent on the channel, to the point where that's really all she ever talks about. Is if it gets her clout, if it gets her an attaboy as an ally, she'll do it, but she doesn't say anything else any of the other times around the years. And she doesn't speak to your average creator. She only speaks to specific creators that she likes and wants on the channel. I guess effectively she is a withholding parent who's only speaks high praise of one child and then completely ignores the dozen or other children. Alright, well, there's nothing else new on my Twitter feed, which, yeah, okay. At some point, we'll just consistently have no new news on the Twitter feed at all, and then it'll just not be a factor, and we'll just wrap up the episodes after I'm done with the fall list cleanup. Anyways, that's going to be it for this stream. As always, I ask you to like, share, subscribe, comment, and watch every second of my videos. If you want a friend or follow me on any social media sites, there's a bunch of links down below. And if you want to support me further, there's a link to Patreon, or you can friend me on Steam and get me a game off my wishlist. Thank you for watching. Have a good evening.